Chapter 17 Battle Camp. The next morning, Aiden was up with the sun, eager to continue his journey upstream to the lime sink and on to Bonifay Plain. Very few of the Feechies were awake to see him off, and those few were awake only because they hadn't yet gone to bed. Dubrow had dozed his way through the night, leaning against the base of the oak tree where Aiden slept. He insisted on guiding Aiden on his journey as far as the western road. Aiden was only too glad to let him, both because he would enjoy the company and because he couldn't possibly find his way otherwise. For most of the trip, they traveled the Feechee way, swinging vine to vine, leaping branch to branch through the treetops. With his mud-gray skin and flying panther cape, Aiden looked like a native Feechee. Aiden performed treetop acrobatics he would have never attempted alone, but he watched Dubrow intently, putting his hands precisely where Dubrow put his hands, leaping to the precise spots where Dubrow leaped, and they progressed through the forest at a clip that Aiden wouldn't have believed possible. There was still an hour left before noon when the boys stopped to rest in a tree overhanging the limestone sink that gave rise to the Bayberry Creek. The western road was in sight. Here on the verge of the civilizers' world, the two friends would have to go their separate ways. Dubrow stared absently at the green water 15 feet below. He spoke for the first time since they had left the meeting hummock. "I don't see why you couldn't stay with us a little bit longer. We was having a good time, wasn't we?" "Sure we were," Aiden answered. "I had the time of my life, but the battle for Cornwall is on. I can't be off frolicking in the swamp with the Feechee folk while my brothers are fighting, maybe even dying, on the battlefield." "Then how about I go with you?" said Dubrow excitedly. "Your fight is my fights now." "Not this fight. This is between the Cornwalders and the Perthens." Dubrow looked hurt. "You don't think I'm a Cornwalder? You don't think them was Cornwalders you spent yesterday evening with?" Aiden paused to think. "No, Dubrow, I don't suppose I ever thought of the Feechee folk as Cornwalders." "The Feechee folk was Cornwalders long years before you civilizers come to this island." Dubrow lifted his head and looked westward toward the battle plain. "You might be right. The battle you're headed to might be none of my business. It might just be one bunch of civilizers fighting another bunch of civilizers to decide who gets to pretend this island belongs to them. That's a fight you can keep for your own." Dubrow turned and looked Ada in the eye. "But if your fight is a fight for Cornwall, that's a whole other thing. You love Cornwall. I know you do. But you don't love it no more than we do." A short silence prevailed between the boys. Dubrow had given Aiden a whole new way of looking at things. "There's an old prophecy in Feechee lore," Dubrow continued. "It tells about a civilizer king who's gonna make one nation out of Cornwall. There won't be no civilizer Cornwall or no Feechee Cornwall, just Cornwall. Most of the Feechee folk don't pay no mind to that old story. They think it's make-believe. Just something to tell the wee Feechees. Most of the Feechee folks wouldn't even want to join up with the civilizers. But I've been keeping an eye out for that civilizer king. When he shows up, I'm going to be the first Feechee to join up with him." Dubrow gave Aiden a sidelong glance, as if he weren't saying everything he was thinking. "But it's probably time you got going," he said, and he shoved Aiden off the tree limb and into the water below. When Aiden came up for air, he heard Dubrow deep in the forest. "Ha ha, haroof, woo! Ha ha, haroof, woo!" Aiden's coat of mud was dissolving into a gray cloud in the green water of the limestone sink. He rubbed away the last of the mud on his face and arms as he swam lazily to the edge of the sink. Climbing onto the grass, he found his flour sack safe and dry. Dubrow, nimble as a pickpocket, had snatched the sack away from Aiden as he fell and dropped it on the grassy bank. Aiden took off his panther cape, shook it dry as best he could, then folded it and placed it in the flour sack. Now that he was out of the creek bottom forest, it was time to become a civilizer again. He shouldered the flour sack and headed down to the western road, energized by the thought of seeing his brothers among the mighty men of Cornwall. Aidan had never seen a real battle camp before, but in daydreams during those long afternoons in the sheep pastures, he had fought many battles and spent many nights encamped with the armies of the Cornwall. His head was filled with clashing arms, with battles and sieges and cavalry charges. Though he was a shepherd boy, Aidan's heart was the heart of a warrior. So when he crested a gentle rise and caught his first glimpse of the Cornwalders' battle camp, a league westward on the Bonifay plain, a thrill surged through his every bone and sinew. At the same time, though, he felt an odd familiarity, as if he were back home after a long time away. Even from the distance, Aidan could see that the encampment looked just the way he had thought it would. Blue and gold battle flags rippled lazily in the slight breeze. A thousand field tents pitched in long ranks. The distant whinny of a war horse, even the smoke drifting up from the remains of the noonday cooking fires. All of these things he had imagined and longed for. The early afternoon sun glinted off the helmets and spear points of a dozen pairs of sentries standing guard around the camp's perimeter. They looked so strong and splendid that it made Aidan's heart hurt with pride to think he was their countryman. A small valley ran along the camp's western edge, the opposite edge from where Aidan stood. A bank of chalky clay led down 10 or 15 feet to a grassy flat where a river had run many years before. On the other side of the valley stood the Perthing camp, its black and red battle flags raised high. Beyond it, as far as the bottomland forest along the Ikehuli River, stretched the plain, treeless except for the occasional cedar planted by farmers who had farmed there decades earlier. It was hard to tell from such a distance, but the Perthing camp seemed to be much larger than the Cornwalder camp. If the Cornwalders had 1,000 tents, the Perthins, it appeared, had 2,000, perhaps even 3,000. Not good odds. Well, then, thought Aidan, all the more glorious shall the Cornwalder victory be. He tossed the bag over his shoulder and broke into a quick trot from the last league of his journey. At the edge of the Cornwalder camp, 2 sentries stood on either side of the path. They were dressed in the plate mail and blue tunics of the Cornwalder foot soldiers. One of the sentries was tall and thin with a wispy mustache and a bashful little chin that didn't protrude quite as far as the Adam's apple just below it. The other was a round little fellow who barely came up to the top of his partner's breastplate. The Cornwalder army hadn't made any uniforms for men his size and shape, or, in any case, he didn't get one. Aidan had to admit that these soldiers looked much more impressive from a league away than they did up close. The sentries were leaning on their spears and appeared to be deep in conversation. They hadn't noticed that Aidan had walked up on them. He cleared his throat loudly to get their attention. They stood up straight and pointed their spears in his direction. In unison, they spoke. "Halt! Who goes there?" Aidan smiled at the sentries and spoke in a confident, soldierly tone as to his equals. "I am Aidan Errolson of Longleaf Manor, loyal subject to King Darrow, and brother to 4 warriors of Cornwall." The sentries turned their heads towards each other, then burst into laughter. The tall one spoke first. "Warriors of Cornwall? Well, they ain't been doing no warrioring around here, I can tell you that." Aidan was perplexed. He looked about him. Isn't this the battle camp of the Cornwalders? Aren't those Cornwall's battle flags flying overhead? The short sentry looked skyward, shielding his eyes from the afternoon sun. "Hey, Terence! Young Aidan Errolson has a point. Those are battle flags." "Well, I'll be," answered Terence. "I thought King Darrow was drying his laundry." He snorted with laughter almost before he had finished the joke. His short round partner laughed a wheezing laugh and slapped his knee. Aidan couldn't believe what he was hearing. These soldiers were mocking the very king they were sworn to serve. the king who had provided them with arms and armor. He thought it best to go on his way and leave them to their hilarity. May I pass? Not so fast. It was Terence, the tall jokester again. Lester, this being a battle camp and all, don't you think we should interrogate the subject? Right, right, said Lester. He assumed an official looking posture. State your name. It's Aiden Errolson. I already told you. Yes, of course, Aiden Errolson of the Fighting Errolsons, brother to 4 warriors. Terence stifled a giggle. Lester resumed the interrogation. State your business. I'm here to see my brothers, to deliver this sack of provisions from home, and to get news of their well-being to bring home to our father. Terence snorted at this. News of their well-being? You can tell Daddy that unless one of the Fighting Errolsons burned himself on his cooking fire or broke a fingernail while polishing up his armor, he's as safe in this battle camp as a babe in arms. Lester broke in. And as for that sack of provisions, we'd be glad to deliver it to your brothers. So you just hand it over and run along home. He reached for the sack. But this time Aiden had had enough of these soldiers and their jokes. He drew back the hand that was holding the sack and glared at the sentries. Though the soldiers were bigger, older, and certainly better armed, they could see that the young shepherd boy meant business. They decided not to press the issue. Well, I reckon we could let you deliver the sack this time, but you better let us have a look inside. Yeah, we can't be allowing parcels to enter the encampment without performing a visual inspection. Terence had learned this official sounding language during his brief training. This seemed a reasonable request. Aiden untied the drawstring at the mouth of the sack and folded back the coarse cloth so the sentries could see inside. It's loaves of bread and new cheeses from our goats. Look, Terence, cheese. Young Aiden of the Fighting Arrows was bringing cheese to his warrior brothers. You know what they say, answered Terence. Nothing fortifies a man's warrior spirit like a nice fresh goat cheese. This was just too much for Terence. He doubled over, laughing at his own joke. Lester, too, was nearly incapacitated with laughter. They leaned on each other, whinnying and guffawing. Aiden was puzzled by the men's behavior. Their hilarity was all out of proportion to the joke, which just wasn't that funny. He had seen people laugh extra hard at little jokes during times of particular jollity. At the solstice festival, for instance, or at the harvest feast, when a summer's long hot labor was finally at an end. But Aiden could see that these men were not laughing from an excess of joy. Theirs was a forced laughter with too much breath and not enough belly. They laughed the way a person laughs when he has slipped and fallen in front of strangers and wants to show he's not embarrassed, even though he is. Aiden cinched up his sack, slung it back over his shoulder, and continued into the camp. If the sentries wished to stop him, they were free to do so, but he had no intention of waiting for them to regain their composure, and they had no intention of stopping him. As he entered the encampment, Aiden realized the sentries had been right about one thing at least. Though there were uniformed soldiers milling about and battle flags flapping overhead, this did not feel like a battle camp. There was no buzz of excitement as he had expected. He did not hear the hum and clank of last-minute battle preparations, no blacksmiths pounding at swords and spears, no mighty men strapping on their armor, no page boys gearing up the war horses. There were no soldiers nursing wounds from battles already fought. He saw no units drilling in the common areas, and in the faces of the soldiers he saw neither grim determination nor the swelling pride of conquest, nor even the fear of death. Instead, he saw heavy-lidded indifference. They looked more like men about to go to sleep than men about to go to war. Aiden saw a few signs of life and vigor among the Cornwalders, but they weren't very encouraging. A particularly animated supply officer beat a pack mule that had stopped in the passage. The next tent row over, an officer and a foot soldier yelled and swore at each other. Behind one of the tents, a knot of soldiers huddled together, talking excitedly and pointing intently at a spot on the ground between them. Aiden thought they must have a map, going over a battle scheme, or planning a raid on the enemy camp. But as he drew near, he realized they were throwing dice, gambling away their soldiers' wages. Aiden wandered down one tent row and then another, searching for his brothers, but without success. Few of the men he passed acknowledged his presence at all. No one noticed that he was lost and confused, nor did anyone help him find his way. Aiden was feeling very discouraged when he heard a voice beside him. "You look lost." Aiden turned to see a boy about his age wearing the hat and side pouch of a messenger. The messenger boy had fallen into step with Aiden and was holding out his hand to shake. "I'm Herschel," he said, showing Aiden the first genuine smile he had seen since arriving at the camp. Aiden shook Herschel's hand. "I'm Aiden." "What are you looking for?" asked the messenger boy. "My brothers, the Errolsons." "Everything around here is arranged by shires," said Herschel. "What shire are you from?" "Hustingshire." "Oh, you're almost there," Herschel answered. He pointed over to his right. "The Hustingshire regiment is 2 tent rows over." "Thanks," said Aiden, shaking the messenger boy's hand. He started to leave in the direction Herschel had pointed, but he stopped. "Herschel," he asked, "can I ask you one thing?" "Sure." "What's going on here?" "How do you mean?" "Look around you. Look at the soldiers in this battle camp. They don't look like the mighty men of Cornwall. These aren't the faces of the free and the true. What's bothering everybody?"